Welcome to Small Business 21st Century and this session of the Wealth Zone University. Thank you for coming back to hang with us, all of you WZUers. As you know, the Wealth Zone University is a financial show, and we say change your mind about money to change your financial future. And we also concentrate on business because we believe that being in business for yourself is the road to economic freedom, and that if you build wealth and value into your business is going to be sustainable, and you will turn out to be, well, let's just say well off, okay? Today we're going to talk about another segment of business, and I put it in quotes, that should be viewed as a business but normally is not, and that's the nonprofit community. And the question that we're going to answer today is, does tax exempt mean nonprofit? Those terms are used interchangeably. When you hear nonprofit, which is used mostly, they're talking about hopefully an organization that is tax exempt. So you also know that in Wealth Zone University, we like to define terms so that we understand exactly what we're talking about. So let's start there. Tax exempt and nonprofit, two different terms used interchangeably. What do they mean and what are they? Let's start with nonprofit because that's the one that we hear almost all of the time. A nonprofit organization is a state designation, not a federal designation, a state designation. When you apply to be enabled for your state as an organization that has a social purpose, not a commercial purpose, it's very possible that you will be enabled under the state's nonprofit statutes. And those nonprofit statutes say that any organization that has a social purpose, and social could be charitable, it could be educational. I mean, there are 23 designations on the Internal Revenue Service Code for the type of organization that can be tax exempt. But for your state, the nonprofit statutes dictate exactly what that is. So you are a nonprofit if your state has enabled your entity as a corporation, as association, anything but under the nonprofit statutes for that state, okay? And the reason that the state is so particular because the organization has to be organized for social purpose, not a commercial purpose. There can be no benefit given to any individual, which is a word called annulment, and there can be no distribution of profits to individuals and other companies. And when that organization dissolves, the net assets, if there are any, have to be given to another such nonprofit organization. So yeah, in nonprofit statutes of each state, there are particular rules which govern these entities, okay? That's nonprofit. Tax exempt, what is that and why is it different? Well, tax exempt is when the Internal Revenue Service takes an organization with a social purpose that has been recognized first by the state as nonprofit and recognizes that organization as exempt from federal income tax. There are almost 23 sections of the Internal Revenue Service Code, or 23 paragraphs of the Internal Revenue Code that these organizations can fit in, but the important part is that you are not tax exempt until you are recognized by the Internal Revenue Service. And so a lot of people think that nonprofits are automatically tax exempt. That is not true. You have to be enabled by the state under its nonprofit statutes first. And if you never apply for federal exemption, then you'll still be a nonprofit. You just won't be federally tax exempt. Once you become a nonprofit, you have to apply. There are a couple of forms, and we won't go into the names now because we're not going to get confusing, that you have to apply to the Internal Revenue Service and ask them to recognize you under one of the 23 statutes that IRS has designated to be tax exempt. When IRS recognizes you as tax exempt, you do not have to pay federal income tax. But IRS doesn't dictate what happens to the state. Some state statutes indicate that the nonprofit can be exempt from state taxes. Other states do not. So you have to know what your state statute actually dictates in terms of formation, activities, disposition, and taxes. The federal tax exemption does not automatically exempt you from state taxes. Now, most states do follow the federal exemption, but I caution you to make sure that you talk with your attorney so that you know exactly whether your state is one of those states, okay? So definitions: nonprofit is an entity that's enabled by the state under the nonprofit statutes. Tax exempt is a nonprofit entity that has been recognized by the Internal Revenue as exempt from paying federal income taxes, okay? Now, you continue to hear these terms used interchangeably as long as you understand what people are talking about, and to encourage those that you're talking to understand it. It's really vital that you remember those two distinctions and what those are. Another thing that you'll hear a lot is organizations calling themselves 501c3s. Now, what is that? Well, as I indicated, under the Internal Revenue Code section 501c, there are 23 designations that tell about social purpose organizations. 501c3, and that's C in parentheses and 3 in parentheses, is the best and most beneficial of those 23 in most minds. Why? Because all of the 501c's get exemption from federal income taxes. But C3 also allows you to request that donations and contributions given to your organization will become deductible by the donors or contributors on their personal tax return, which is a significant advantage in attracting money from individuals and corporations, and a significant advantage to those who can benefit from that tax provision, okay? So 501c3 is the one that gives you both tax exemption from federal income tax, and you have to ask for it. IRS doesn't automatically give it to you. If you request that the organization also has deductibility, is what it's called, then you'll get that designation too, okay? So as an example, 501c3 has both, and if you request it, you get both, but 501c4 only has tax exemption. You cannot request that donor deductibility on 501c4, and that goes for most of the other 23 designations, okay? So we're good with those definitions. Again, nonprofit is a designation given to you by the state because you have been enabled under the state nonprofit statutes. And tax exempt is an application that a nonprofit that's been recognized by the state has to request from the Internal Revenue Service in order to be federally tax exempt. And if you meet the purposes and provisions, you can also request that donations given to your organization be deductible by the donor or contributor, okay? That's really vital, all right? So now we've got that straightened out. Let's talk about what is the purpose of a nonprofit organization. Well, we can look at right now. There are people who are homeless, hungry, families that are indigent. There are just so many things, social things, that the government can't and does not address, that someone has to do that. And that's why nonprofit organizations are so vital to society, because nonprofit organizations are the ones who feed homeless, educate, everything that we need as a society that the government can't provide or doesn't provide. It has to be provided by these nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit organizations are vital to our existence. Nonprofit organizations are vital to our communities. Nonprofit organizations are vital to our families and our children. And so, believe me, this segment of commerce is the segment of commerce that makes our lives better and the lives of the people that we know better and the lives in our community better, okay? It's not a commercial. They're not selling things to make a profit. They are doing things that will help our lives, and it's absolutely vital that we understand that these organizations need our help and support. You may have heard this term 3 T's, which is treasury, time, and talent. Those are the 3 things that nonprofits needs from all of us. All of us. They need our time, they need our talent, and they need our treasury. And I'm going to add one more, a 4th one. They need our teaming. So I'm going to talk about each one of those very, very briefly. Time is when I volunteer. I give my time to this organization to help it operate or to help it function. 2, my talent. I'm an accountant. I'm a CFO. I bring that skill to this organization to help this organization to, again, operate and service the population that it needs. Treasury. I bring my finances, my contributions, my corporate sponsorships, all of those. I bring that to this organization also. And lastly, the one I just added was teaming. I bring my relationships and my contacts and the people that I know who will hopefully also bring their 3 T's and a 4th T with them when they come, because these nonprofit organizations cannot operate without our devotion, commitment, and involvement. Okay? So remember the 3 T's, and now if the Wealth Zone University has 4 T's, and that's because you and I, or you and me, I'm sorry about that, you and me have to make sure that we are involved with the nonprofits in our communities, okay? Great. So we've talked terms, and remember, we believe in the Wealth Zone University that terms are important, definitions are important, so digest that, okay? And when you'll see, just take a picture of the slide so that you fully understand exactly what's going on. And so let's take a nonprofit and compare that to a commercial business. How is it run? Well, a commercial business has the CEO, and then if it's large enough, it has a board, and then it has management. Well, the nonprofit similarly has a leader, which was normally called the executive director as opposed to a CEO. It has a board, which has a specific legal and fiduciary function, which may or may not be the function of a board in a commercial enterprise. Then it has management and operations, which is responsible for running the organization. Okay? Now, the distinction that I want to make sure that we all understand is that a board in a nonprofit organization has legal and fiduciary responsibilities that we should all take seriously. They are legally held responsible for the proper operation of that not-for-profit organization, that nonprofit organization. Excuse me for using not-for-profit. I'll get to that term later on. For right now, I want you to understand very, 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 very deeply that nonprofit, tax-exempt are different. And as we use those terms, it's vital that we know what we're talking about. We'll be right back in a second. We're going to talk about something that's extremely interesting in the nonprofit community. So hang out. We'll be right back. Thanks. The objective of the Wealth Zone University is to change your mind about money, to change your financial future. Hi, I'm your host, Don Moragne. In the Wealth Zone University sessions, my guests and I talk about a wide variety of business, financial, and other worldly topics. We are seeking to both educate and entertain you. We emphasize that the information and discussions are my opinion, perspectives, and ideas, and those of our guests. We in no way intend to deliver or provide financial, tax, or business advice. You should consult with your tax, accounting, financial, insurance, and legal advisors regarding the impact, application, or pertinence of any topic or opinion that we share on the Wealth Zone University. Welcome back to the second segment of the Wealth Zone University. We're answering the question, does tax-exempt mean nonprofit? In the first segment, we talked about terms. In the second segment, we're going to talk about business. And why do I say business when I talk about nonprofits? Someone told the board and the management team and the community that nonprofit organizations aren't supposed to make money. I mean, think about that. Nonprofit organizations are not supposed to make money. And that is a fallacy that is ingrained in board members, in the public, in the community, that their organization is not supposed to be making money. And I want to dispel that rumor right now. Nonprofit has to be operated like a business, but not for a business purpose. It's operated for a social purpose. A nonprofit has to be operated so that it has net income because it's a going concern. It can't run out of money at December 31st every year and then start all over again. That does not make any business sense. And so the mindset that I want us to talk about in this segment is that nonprofits have to be operated like businesses. Must be. The board, the operations team, the management team have to incorporate good financial management, cash management, and have a positive bottom line. And you can do all of that while serving a social purpose. It happens all the time. There are large organizations, large nonprofits that are making lots and lots of money doing good things. They're not two different objectives. They're the same objective. The thing that is happening is that people who do not really understand the nonprofit and the business connection assume that the nonprofit is not supposed to be operating as a going concern. And that is a fallacy that if we begin to remove it and change our minds about it and change the minds of the stakeholders and everyone who's involved, that will help the nonprofit community immensely. And so let's talk about that. Most of the large nonprofits that we know of are not operated by the board and not operated by management. They bring in organizations called association management companies. These are companies that actually come into a large organization, and for a percentage of the revenue, they will build revenue, they will operate the organization, they will do everything that the operation needs, again, for a percentage of revenue. So the board has responsibility for governing, but this association management company has responsibility for running the organization, and they do. Some things that I've read say that on the average, association management, when it comes in, on the first year, it increases the revenue by 9%. In the years later on, it can do even better. And so while you may think that this big organization is being run by mom and pop, they're not. Mom and pop are on the board. They bring in a professional organization to take care of it, and the organization has to raise revenue, and for their efforts, they get a percentage of the revenue, and that's a cost, okay? So when we're thinking about organizations, we need to think that our organizations and the nonprofits in our communities that we know of have to be operating as would any good business as a going concern, to have cash flow, positive cash flow, and positive management on an ongoing basis. And it's been said that a nonprofit can't have a commercial business component. It can have a social component, which it is, but it's said that it can't have a commercial business component. And that's not true either. It's not true under the state statutes, and it's also not true under the federal tax-exempt statutes. A nonprofit can have a for-profit component or a totally another business. I'll give you an example. AARP, we all know AARP, we see it all of the time. In AARP, they have it's a 501c4, so contributions are not deductible. AARP mostly gets membership and membership dues and does advocacy, education, and political lobbying for those 50 and over, okay? AARP also gets the vast majority of its revenue from royalties, from lending out its name and its likeness, and from advertising for letting people advertise in its magazine and on its shows. I mean, it's using everything that it possibly can to make sure that there is money flowing through its organization, the AARP. It's called social enterprise. Social enterprise, and that's a term that I want you to make sure that you bring to your board and to your management staff on any nonprofit that you know, that social enterprise is revenue that is generated from a business-like component or business-like program that furthers the mission of the organization, okay? So again, a nonprofit remains nonprofit, but it can have components that are more commercial in nature and still remain nonprofit and still maintain its tax exemption, okay? If an organization that's tax exempt has a commercial or a provision that is more commercial, there's a provision in the Internal Revenue Service Code called unrelated business income tax. They just pay income tax on that portion of the revenue. Everything else is still tax exempt, but that is on the commercial revenue. They just pay income tax. They won't lose their tax exemption unless there are other factors that come in that jeopardize it. But that's something that we've got to be aware of, that commercial enterprise is something that we have got to start our boards to looking at, because our board is responsible for the operation of the nonprofit, its strategy, its planning, its fundraising, everything. The board is responsible for that, and it's important that the board understand the extent of the possibilities for bringing in revenue to support that organization, okay? Really important. And so, one more thing. Somewhere around here, I've got some stats that show that Goodwill, and we all know Goodwill, it's been around since 1920s, I think. Goodwill makes $8 billion, with a B, $8 billion a year. It's a 501c3, and it makes $8 billion a year, okay? And it has almost $1 million net profit and reserve after it spends all of that money. So the clothing and the other great stuff that we give to it, they turn around and they sell it. And they also have a wide variety of other programs from which they make money. $8 billion a year for a nonprofit. Now, your nonprofit may not ever be in that revenue range, but we've got to start thinking properly so that we can know that we've got to make our nonprofits sustainable, which means that they can take care of themselves. And we have to make our nonprofits going concerns, which means they are a good business entity. The prime area that nonprofits get their revenue from are grants. And it used to be government grants. Unfortunately, those government grants are becoming less and less available. So it's foundation grants and other grants that we have to ask for. But those foundation grants and other grants specifically tell the nonprofit what that money or grant has to be used for and in what time frame that grant has to be used. And it all has to be used for the specific purpose for which the grant was provided. And so where does the nonprofit get the money to pay salaries, operations, advertising, keep the doors open, rent, and everything else that a going concern has to have. Where does it get it from? Contributions? Well, contributions come in, and contributions and donations are two different things, and we'll talk about that some other time. But right now, let's use those words interchangeably. They come in, they're used, but normally the operational, the keeping the doors open, can be at least 25 to 30% of an organization's expenses. And if the grant will only let you use their money for their program, we understand why the nonprofit has to operate as a business and has to operate with financial management strategies that will make sure that it's a going concern and stays around, okay? So this special segment of society, nonprofit, tax exempt, are vital. We've got to change our mindset about how we perceive it. They are not nonprofit when it comes to being able to sustain themselves, okay? And so when I call us the stakeholders, because we are the ones who are benefiting from these organizations, are supporting these organizations, and are running the organizations, we stakeholders have to realize that nonprofits and tax exempts are to be treated and run like businesses. Get involved with your nonprofit in your community. And remember, the Wealth Zone University says, change your mind about money to change your financial future. If you follow what we're talking about and what we're saying, you will be one of those people who make sure that nonprofits stay sustainable. Take care. We've got 2 free ebooks. One is Social Entrepreneurship, and the other is Board Guide that we gladly send to you if you send us an email so you can see what we're talking about. And of course, we'll answer any questions about tax exempt and nonprofit that you have. We'll see you next time. Till then, be good.